So, hello, and welcome to Truth You Can Wake Up To. I'm Samuel William, on the 17th of April 2012. So, a fairly provocative title for this video. Occupy is an inside job. Could this possibly be true? Is there any evidence for this? Plus, what do you mean an inside job? Well, I say provocative because of the idea of agent provocateur, provocation agents that could be embedded within the occupation movement, both Occupy London, Occupy Wall Street in New York, Occupy Atlanta, Phoenix, you name it, Occupy anything, could be infiltrated. Now this would be a bit of a problem, wouldn't it? Because nobody would know who they were. They could be pushing a different agenda, steering it in a certain direction that possibly might be good for those who want to control us. So let's go back. Let's go back slightly. And let's just look at a couple of examples of undercover agents that have been exposed in protest groups. First, and probably best known, especially in the United Kingdom, is a man called Mark Kennedy. Now, Mark Kennedy was an undercover policeman who was embedded in the protest movement, mainly the environmental protest movement, for about 7 years. He actually was thrown into the light of day, into the press, because he'd actually changed his mind while he was undercover. He'd had children with a fellow activist, and he'd been undercover for so long, he'd actually been converted to the cause. I'll just quote from a Guardian article about when this was found out. The article is called Mark Kennedy, A Journey from Undercover Cop to Bona Fide Activist. Subtitle, No one suspected Mark Kennedy was undercover when he joined environmental activists, but has he now switched sides? And the article continues. He, Mark Kennedy, turned up with long hair, tattoos, and an insatiable appetite for climbing trees. Few people suspected anything odd of the man who introduced himself as Mark Stone on a dairy farmed turned spiritual sanctuary in North Yorkshire. He'd come alone on the 12th of August 2003 in the middle of a heat wave for a gathering of environmental activists known as Earth First. Apart from the fact that Stone was apparently well paid and ate meat, he appeared no different from the hundreds of other activists who gathered under marquees to smoke weed, play guitars, and plan protests. What no one could have known was that despite appearances, the 33-year-old freelance climber was actually PC Mark Kennedy, an undercover police officer beginning an audacious operation to live deep undercover among environmental activists. From that day, Kennedy would live a remarkable double life lasting more than 7 years. So embedded in the protest community did he become that about 200 people turned up for a joint celebration of his 40th birthday, described as a 3-day bender on a farm. All were, of course, oblivious that Kennedy was feeding back detailed reports to his police commanders as he participated in and sometimes even organised some of the most high-profile demonstrations of the past decade. So that's the an introduction into the kind of shenanigans that are going on there in the protest movement and have been for a very long time, up to 10 years. Now, at the same time, another revelation of a very similar case came out. A lady called Lynn Watson, who was an anti-war protester, but of course actually an undercover policewoman. Now, I believe this came about when she was actually recognised because of quite a famous video of her dressed as a clown invading the offices of various MPs. She was monitoring so-called domestic extremists who were part of a group who used to dress up as clowns, go into various high-profile offices or secure environments and play pranks and just kind of make them look silly. So the police decided to secrete one of their police officers inside this little movement so they could document and identify and understand the psychology of all of the people that were in this little anti-war group. Of course, she was identified and outed and left. She, in this occasion, didn't transfer her allegiance over to the so-called enemy, in that she just went back to the police force. Now, a thing that comes up that's quite interesting is that she was actually working on behalf of the police, but actually a little subdivision of the police called the National Public Order Intelligence Unit. Now, the NPOIU, the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, is sort of described in an article by the Telegraph from January last year, which says the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, NPOIU, which exists to counter domestic extremism, is so secretive that police will not confirm the precise location of its base or the identity of its head. And on the article, they have a lovely picture of old PC Mark Kennedy in a nice hat and glasses. And it says the unit employs about 60 to 70 officers, and its central feature is a national intelligence database holding details collected on activists and extremists by local forces. It doesn't say uniformed police officers, it says local forces, presumably dressed as clowns. It carries on. It has recently undergone a period of significant growth, with its budget more than doubling in 4 years, from 2.6 million in 2005 to 2006 to 5.7 million in 2009 to 2010. It says its purpose is to gather information on extremist protesters. Under extremist protesters, you can read people that like freedom of speech, so that police can assess potential threats posed to public safety. Sorry, it's very difficult to maintain a straight face when I'm reading this. They assess potential threats posed to public safety and to investigate crimes linked to protests. According to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, the NPOIU performs an intelligence function in relation to politically motivated disorder, not wars. I added that bit myself. We don't investigate the wars. Sorry, I added that again myself. And they coordinate the national collection, analysis, exploitation and dissemination of intelligence on the extremist threat to public order. A Freedom of Information request was sent to the Metropolitan Police on the 1st of July 2010 asking how many people are on the database and what sort of information is held about these individuals, and are they designated domestic extremists, and how much does it cost to operate this system, and who has access to this data outside the Metropolitan Police? And the response was slightly interesting in that they responded saying, I am writing to inform you that the information you have requested is not held by the Metropolitan Police. So presumably they've already transferred it to Lockheed Martin or somebody like that, maybe some other high bidder. So we know there's a database, we know they don't really want to tell us what it is, we know that they are essentially spying on all of these things, which could lead us to understand a little bit better about what happened at Occupy London, which we will get to very shortly. First, I want to talk about Brian Hoare. Now, Brian Hoare was the very dedicated anti-war campaigner that stuck at his protest in Parliament Square for 10 years. Has sadly passed away of cancer. But the Parliament Square protest is still down there. It's now run by Barbara Tucker. Now, it's very difficult for Barbara down there to actually maintain this 24/7 vigil at Parliament Square because she's not allowed any sleeping equipment at all. Now, this is where the agents of provocation come in. Because while Brian Hoare was still alive, another protest camp turned up in Parliament Square. It was called Peace Strike, and that gave birth to Democracy Village. For a while there, the entire central square of Parliament Square, the grassy bits in between the statues of some of our most stand-up and respectable Prime Minister war criminals, in the central square, a village came about. Now, instantly, of course, Brian Hoare was there 24/7. He obviously interacted with these guys quite a lot. He maintained a permanent blog, which he was writing on nearly every single day. You can still read that blog by just Googling Brian Hoare blog. And it is now written by Barbara Tucker. Now, in various blog posts surrounding the time when Parliament Village first got going, Brian Hoare started calling them Cameron's Rent-a-Mob. Now, he was saying that because he believed very strongly, and the evidence seemed to accumulate that this was true, that Democracy Village was itself a creation of these undercover activists working for the Met Police. Now, there were lots of people who came to Democracy Village and sort of filled it up that obviously were just very well-meaning campaigners for environmentalism and anti-war and all of this kind of stuff. But the core of them, the organisers, the ones that made the decisions to go there in the first place and to stay there and how to build the camp, they were agents undercover. Now, why would agents undercover working for the police create Democracy Village? Well, for a very simple reason. David Cameron himself, and also our Mayor, Boris Johnson, had been very, very vocal about the need to get rid of the Brian Hoare peace campaign because it doesn't look very good. It draws attention to some nasty things going on around the world that we'd prefer to forget. So David Cameron actually made it one of his election pledges to get rid of the peace campaign when he came in. Now, how do you get rid of a peace campaign? By adding to it. Well, they already had in place from about 2005 a thing called SOCPA. SOCPA. S-O-C-P-A. The Serious Organised Crime and Policing Act, which brings out an exclusion zone, a 1 kilometre exclusion zone for protests around Parliament Square. You could have one if you had permission, but you had to get permission, otherwise you would be moved away. Now, Brian Hoare, because he'd been there before this law had been brought in, managed to exploit a loophole to say, well, I've been here for said amount of years, you can't get rid of me. Attended court, fought for it, was granted the ability to stay through the court system. So he circumvented the original exclusion zone for protests. So when the Democracy Village started and created this huge problem, and as Brian Hoare said, these people weren't just demonstrating, they were going to the toilet on the square. They were drinking, they were taking drugs, they were playing loud music. They were basically having a party here, creating a problem so that there was more political assertion or political drive to get rid of the camp altogether. Now, the Democracy Village created such a problem in Parliament Square, they had to put barriers all the way around, excluding people from there, so they were pushed off onto the periphery. There's lots of little videos from Brian Hall's blogs where he's had set twos and arguments with these guys, who, a lot of them, to be honest, if you really look at them, they sort of have this demographic of a young policeman. Now, the problems that were created by Democracy Village brought in a strengthening of SOCPA, called the Serious Organised Crime and Policing Act 2011, which outlawed sleeping equipment. No tents, no sleeping bags, no pillows, nothing was allowed within that exclusion zone, which meant that the Democracy Village disappeared, and also the cover, the security, the comfort of the original Brian Hall peace campaign was undermined because they were no longer allowed to shelter from the weather. But it didn't stop them, ladies and gentlemen. They are still there, just without a cover. 24 hours a day, in the rain, in the hail, in the wind, all through the night. A 24-hour vigil without any cover. I mean, that is commitment. So Democracy Village essentially failed. But the law about putting up tents really started to help when they needed to get rid of Occupy London. Now, there is a connection between Occupy London and Democracy Village, which is this guy called Phoenix, who has been called out again and again by Brian Hall for being an undercover shill, somebody who is directing the Occupy movement from within. Does this guy remind you of PC Mark Kennedy? Just a little bit? Just a little? Just a little. Now, I started to cotton on to the idea of Occupy London being an inside job when I bumped into a guy known as Dom. And some of you may have come across this guy before, but it was actually just a few months back when I was milling around. I decided to go up there. I bumped into this guy. I asked him what he thought about Occupy London. Now, I will point out, by this point, Occupy London had been evicted from St Paul's Cathedral, and most of them had moved up around the corner where there was another camp at Finsbury Square. And I talked to Dom, and this is what he said. What's your name?
Well, I don't have a name. Everyone calls me Dom.
Dom?
Dom, D-O-M.
What on earth is going on here?
Well, this is a government experiment. This is social engineering and manipulation by using skills of NLP. Other things like the Delphi technique is where you have general assemblies, which these guys have. They have a meeting about what they're going to talk about in their general assemblies, and they have an agenda. So within this agenda, they're like, this is what we've got to pass through at a general assembly. Then 6 of their agents will sit there with their shaky hands technique, which means agree, and they pass through whatever they need to. Whatever the matter, if somebody's got a question from the community, and they say, right, I've got this, then like if it's a question that they don't want to answer within their agenda because it will expose them, then what they'll do is they'll go to one of their change agents who are putting their hand up for a direct point, and they'll go off the subject very cleverly. This is just a government project to engineer mass groups, and this is worldwide. It is a social experiment, my friend, that's right. In this situation where you've got somebody's perception of freedom, which is a load of tents sitting on a bit of land, that's not my perception of freedom, I'm afraid, but they here are the Tavistock Institute, Common Purpose, These are the guys that have been running the show since week one. Tavistock Institute have been doing social dreaming events at Finsbury Square occupation, which I'd like to rename Finsbury Square. All they're promoting here is a martial law. You follow our rules, do as you're told. We'll see how far we can push you. The rules we're actually making are more rules than the government could ever impose on you. It's like Agenda 21 and Codex Alimentarius rolled into one.
Are you saying...
One second. The thing is, they're saying the rules are no alcohol, no meat to be eaten in the kitchen. You know what I mean? These are no open fire to keep you warm. I've had government agents try and tell me I can't have a fire, but I've never had a government agent come up to me and say you can't eat meat. You know what I mean? You might as well say you've got to stop smiling. Have you gone through the thought process working group? Well, sorry, I haven't. Well, how dare you think for yourself? That's why we're all doing this. We're starting to make chai out the front here and tell people the truth of what's going on and how they've manipulated people's minds. But if you look at the economic system, I think this isn't being infiltrated, this is being orchestrated from the start. If you look at the economic system, the monetary system's about to fall apart. It's got to that peak. It's going to go, not in just one country, worldwide. It needed to come here to the Crown, to the Corporation of London, which is the Crown. It had to come here because that's the financial district of the world. You've got 3 super-states like the Vatican hidden inside Rome. It's a separate country inside Rome. You've got the Corporation of London, which is known as the Crown, which is inside London, half a square mile. It's the banking district. And then you've got Washington, D.C., inside Washington. These are the super-states that are controlling the world. And at the moment, we've got this orchestrated revolution to basically bring in the New World Order. This is promoting one world currency, one world government, and one world religion.
So, one world currency, a global agenda, Agenda 21, is Occupy London and maybe other Occupy protests, are they pushing for that? Well, certainly in Occupy London there has been this environmentalism, this green agenda from the very beginning. Now, of course, if you're listening to this and thinking, what do you mean? He's against the green agenda? Well, not in so much as pollution is bad. I don't like, breathing in exhaust fumes any more than anybody else does. I believe we need clean air, clean skies, clean water. I believe in that kind of environmentalism, but man-made global warming, climate change, no. The very first banner to go up at Occupy London outside St Paul's Cathedral, what did it say? It said, capitalism is crisis. Doesn't seem like an environmental banner, does it? But that is the slogan of an organisation called Climate Camp. Now, if you've never come across Climate Camp before, it's a sort of an amorphous group of people who have the agenda to stop climate change. And to do that, they're going to take direct action. They generally operate by swooping in to various places, generally in central London. One Christmas, they took over Trafalgar Square for the whole of Christmas time and then went away again. They specialise in things like climbing. Hello, ding, 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 starting to sound a little bit like PC Mark Kennedy. That's how he got into this group, because he was good at climbing. And they believe very strongly in consensus opinion, which they get from having GAs, or General Assemblies. They have all sort of different hand signals which mean different things. I agree, or I have a technical point, or any of that kind of thing, which seems like it's a good idea. However, it turns out that not only are Climate Camp throughout Occupy London, which is about the financial system, not about the climate, but they are taking the General Assemblies. The leadership of Occupy London tends towards Climate Camp leadership. Is the agenda getting mixed up here? Are we having a confused message put forward to a public that is wondering why people are protesting the financial system? Are we protesting the financial system because of its effect on the climate? Well, that's not particularly the goal of Occupy. Plus, I personally would question anyway the whole idea that capitalism has failed, which it tends to be what the message is coming through from the Occupy movement, that capitalism is wrong. I would fundamentally disagree with that. With capitalism, you have a free market. Now, the free markets that we are told that exist within countries and the reduction of trade barriers and all this kind of stuff, free trade, as it's called, is just branding, because the government is involved producing laws that control companies and give monopolies for different companies and all this kind of stuff. If we had proper free market capitalism, that drives down prices, it improves quality, it produces jobs and opportunity, entrepreneurship, and it drives forward research and development. Unfortunately, we don't have it. But because the Occupy movement is saying capitalism has failed, and the governments that control us, the state that controls Britain, America, Germany, Sweden, anywhere, they say we have free market capitalism when we don't. They're going to tell us that freedom has failed. And it's a danger that is what the Occupy movement is telling us, that freedom has failed. Now, if freedom fails, what do you get instead? Now, when looking into what that guy commonly known as Dom says, he mentions the Tavistock Institute and Common Purpose. Well, Common Purpose has come up. It turns out that somebody who had put themselves in a position of leadership, i.e. they were taking the General Assemblies and pushing the agenda, turns out they were trained by Common Purpose. The Tavistock Institute, it turns out, was doing a thing similar to a General Assembly in Occupy London, but it was called Social Dreaming. Now, as this guy Dom says, the Tavistock Institute is actually, they concentrate on things like social engineering, behavioural manipulation. They're the ones that work on political party campaigns and help the government. These think tanks work out what people like, what people don't like, what you can say to them to produce a certain result. The manipulation, the engineering of consent is what the Tavistock Institute is all about. This guy Dom will tell you that the Tavistock Institute is basically lots and lots of Derren Browns. So basically a form of hypnotism, a form of NLP, neuro-linguistic program, which is exactly what Common Purpose does with people as well. So if you have Common Purpose and the Tavistock Institute coming out doing a thing called social dreaming, asking people what they want the future to look like, well, watch one of Derren Brown's programs and you tell me that he doesn't put ideas into people's heads and then they just bring them up and they think it's their own ideas. Well, that is the sort of thing that it turns out is going on in these General Assemblies and this social dreaming experiment that is going on in Occupy London. Now, I very much recommend visiting Dom's YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/commonly known as Dom, all one word, because there's a curious thing going on with the finances of Occupy London. It turns out that while they were at St Paul's Cathedral, they were getting huge donations through their website and other places, up to £500 a day. Now, you've got to think that they would have been sort of collecting some of that, thinking, well, when we do get evicted, what can we do with this money? How can we push the movement forward? a little nest egg, although they're sort of against the financial system. Come on, we all sort of need some kind of money in order to keep going. Well, it turns out that the finance officers for Occupy London, who were self-appointed, just happened to be putting the money away, not into an account for Occupy London, but for an account for Climate Camp, an old, unused account by Climate Camp, and all the money disappeared. Quite a few £1,000 with which they were going to plan their next move when they got evicted, or use for bail to get some of their people out of jail or whatever. That money, gone. And Dom investigates on his YouTube channel. Now, somebody once said about Occupy London that it was a protest to end all protests. Now, this is quite a worrying idea. But if you look at what's happening, especially in the run-up to the Olympics, you see that it is, and it was, in fact, a protest to end protests. Not only with the Occupy movement and Democracy Village and the involvement of provocative agents working for various intelligence companies, not only have you got the banning of tents and static protests without permission from the police, you have also got the idea of the army on the streets. Now, don't get me wrong, during the Olympics, they were always going to put the army on the streets. Some people say 15,000 troops, some people say 40,000 troops. We're going to have, during the Olympic Games, surface-to-air missiles to, quote, shoot airliners from the sky. 9/11 style, or what should have happened at the Pentagon on 9/11. Of course, selling the fear. Now, during the Olympic Games, all of the bus lanes, all of the taxi lanes throughout central London, both in the City of London itself and also in the City of Westminster, are going to be shut and turned into designated routes for athletes and Olympic officials. It's going to cause massive traffic jams in central London that we all sort of know is going to happen. That's why some people are moving away from London for the Olympic Games. But some of us, like myself, are actually stuck here. Now, the Occupy London movement that are now in Finsbury Square are getting together with some of the protesters from the Olympic Stadium, where they've built on various bits of natural land, or they've built on various bits of green space and all of that kind of stuff. They're getting together again with environmental activists to do direct actions during the Olympics, blocking roads. So they're going to be sitting in roads, causing even worse horrendous traffic jams, and basically causing civil disturbances during the Olympics. Now, of course, the army is going to be in force during the Olympics. The police are going to be everywhere during the Olympics. If they go along with what they're doing, mixing the message, is it about the financial system? Is it about the environment? Is it about the land that's been built on for the Olympic Stadium? Is it about something else? Is it just about civil rights? Whatever happens, the army are going to be acting against the people. The police are going to be acting against the people. There's going to be an outcry from the public to say, yes, get the army out there. Stop these green t-shirt wearing hippies that don't understand anything at all off the streets. That's not what I'm saying. That's what the people will say as they are led by things like the Evening Standard in London and also the Metro, this free newspaper that people pick up and read on the tube, which is always touting these people are terrorists. These people are domestic terrorist extremists. We need to do something about it. How could they mess up the most important event, i.e. the Olympics, in our entire lives, which is what we're being told again and again and again through the mass media. Now, if there was a real movement to actually solve the problem of the financial system, but not by saying we need more control, but actually saying we need less control. That's the only solution we could ever have, is to have less control by the state or the government or the police or the army. Less control by them is the solution, not more control. And it seems that the Occupy movement, as it moves towards the Occupy the Olympics movement, is going to do the complete opposite. Now, just to leave you on with one little thought, the word occupy may well have been put there from the very conception of the movement to undermine it. Now, the reason is this, and this is how it works in central London. In central London, if you're protesting, you cannot get a High Court injunction under the Public Order Act over a peaceful assembly in a public place. I'll say that again. You cannot get a High Court injunction under the Public Order Act to remove a protest over a peaceful assembly in a public place. So if you assemble peacefully, you cannot be removed. Now look at the word occupy. What does it mean? There's some people out there on the internet will say occupy has as a legal definition like occupying a country, like an act of war. No, actually it doesn't mean that. It's a lot more simple. It means take possession of or make one's home at. And I think that's the most important one in terms of how the law is operating upon the idea of getting rid of tents. So people cannot have a 24-hour sitting static protest. Occupy means making one's home at. Not a peaceful assembly, which they can't remove, but making your home. I am occupying this space. They will say, oh, actually, no. We've brought in a law that says that's illegal. Off you go. If you're saying, I'm not occupying this space, I'm peacefully assembling to protest the corruption in our financial and political system, you're allowed to stay, and they cannot use violence against you. So it is the use of the word occupy that actually gives them the power to remove you. Thank you very much for listening. Please do check out the rest of my videos on the YouTube channel. Quite a few now, 32. I'm going on for now 600 subscriptions. Of course, I've only been on air since early December. Of course, go back and have a look at some of the early ones. You'll realise that actually I was a lot more boring back then. I think I'm slightly less boring now, hopefully. But, you know, let me know. Comment on this video and click the thumbs up button. Subscribe to S. Williamism. But until you hear me again, this has been Truth You Can Wake Up To.